5,000 years ago, in the flat country between two rivers, the people who invented writing pressed a map into wet clay. It was not a map of their land. It was a map of what lay underneath it. And they did not draw what a school book draws now. They drew floors, one beneath another, going down. First a sea of fresh water held inside the earth. Then, below that, a long staircase into the dark. At the bottom of the staircase a wall, and in the wall a gate bolted from the far side, and behind that gate 6 more gates, and past the 7th a house of dust with no light in it, ruled by a queen who never comes up, where everyone who has ever died sits in the dark and eats dust for bread. They believed it was really there, directly beneath your feet, directly beneath the floor of the room you are lying in right now. We know all of this because the clay kept it. These people wrote by pressing a cut reed into wet clay and letting it bake hard in the sun, and they buried it, and it waited in the ground through every empire that came after. And when men dug it up in the last 2 centuries and slowly learned to read it again, this is one of the things it said, that the world has a downward direction, that the down is not empty, that it is arranged in floors, and that at the very bottom is a house you walk into once and never walk out of. Tonight we are going all the way down into it, floor by floor, gate by gate, down past the water, down the long stair, through all 7 gates, into the throne room at the bottom, and back out again the only way anyone has ever come out. You will hear, as you always do with these tablets, things that sound strangely familiar. A garden, a flood, gates you pass through one at a time, giving something up at each one. A queen in the dark, a tunnel under a mountain. You will wonder which story came first. Do not hold any of it too tightly. Let the names move past you like the walls of a stairwell as you go down it. We begin at the surface, where the ground is still warm, and then we start to go down. To understand the world below the earth, you first have to understand how these people pictured the whole of it, because they did not imagine what you imagine. When you think of the earth, you think of a ball hanging in black space, and you know more or less what is under your feet, because you have seen the diagrams in school. A thin crust, a hot mantle, a core of iron. The Sumerians and the Babylonians had none of that, and what they had instead was stranger and, in its own way, more beautiful. They saw the universe as a set of floors stacked one on top of another, held apart by open space, joined by ropes and bonds that the gods had tied at the beginning to keep the whole thing from collapsing back together. At the top were the heavens, and even the heavens had floors, an upper heaven of the highest god, a middle heaven, and the low sky, where the stars were set like writing. Below that was the surface of the earth, the ground you stand on, with its cities and its rivers and its fields. And below the ground the floors kept going. Directly beneath the surface was water, not the sea. A second water, a fresh water, a vast still ocean held inside the earth itself, and this is one of the oldest ideas these people had, and one of the truest to their experience. Because they lived in a land where you could dig down almost anywhere and reach it. They called it the Abzu, or in the northern tongue the Abzu, and it was the sweet water under the world, the source of every spring and every well and every river that rose up out of the ground. When you drank from a well, you were drinking the Abzu. When a spring came up cold and clear in a dry place, that was the Abzu reaching the surface. It was down there, under everything, an entire sea in the dark, and it had an owner. His name was Enki, and if you keep only one god from tonight, keep him, because he lives at the first floor down, and he will be with us the whole way to the bottom. Enki was the god of the sweet water and the god of wisdom, which to these people were nearly the same thing, since wisdom, like water, comes up from somewhere hidden and you cannot live without it. He was the clever one, the one who solved what could not be solved, the one who again and again in these stories takes the side of human beings against the other gods. And he lived down in the Abzu, in the fresh water beneath the ground, in a house he had built on the still surface of the deep. His city on the surface was called Eridu, and Eridu, the tablets say, was the first city there ever was. The oldest king list the Sumerians kept begins with a single line that is worth carrying down into sleep with you. After kingship came down from heaven, it says, the kingship was in Eridu, the first place, the beginning of everything that we would call civilized, the first city, the first temple, the first king, and it sat directly above the sweet water, above Enki's house in the deep, so that the beginning of the world above and the doorway to the world below shared one address. If you went to Eridu today, you would find almost nothing. A low worn mound in a dry plain, the wind moving over it, no green anywhere. The rivers that once fed it long since wandered off to other beds. But men dug into that mound, and what they found underneath is one of the quietest and most moving things in all of archaeology, and we will come back to it near the end of the night. For now, hold only this. The first temple ever built stood over the entrance to the deep, and it was rebuilt on the same spot, one temple on top of the ruins of the last, again and again, for thousands of years, because the people never forgot what was underneath it. It is worth staying with that water a little longer, because it was not a theory to these people. It was daily life. They lived on a flat plain of mud laid down by two rivers, with no stone in it and no hill worth the name, and almost anywhere you drove a shaft into the ground, before very long, water rose up to meet you. Dig a well in the courtyard, and you struck it. Dig the foundations of a house too deep, and they filled. The marshes at the river's edge were that same water lying open on the surface, thick with reeds taller than a man, and the springs that broke out cold and clean in the dry ground were the same water finding its way up. So when they said there was a sea beneath the world, they were not inventing a fantasy. They were describing the thing that was under their own floors, the thing the wells reached, the thing that fed the reeds and the rivers, a whole ocean of sweet water held in the dark under the skin of the land. And they gave it to the god who was cleverest and kindest of them all, and they built their first city and their first temple directly on top of it. The heavens above were arranged the same way, in floors, because floors were how these people saw everything, levels held apart by open space and tied together with cosmic ropes, so the whole tall structure would not collapse back into one. Just above the flat earth was the low sky, where the birds went and the clouds moved. Above that, the sky of the stars, and the stars to them were not fire but writing, the script of the gods drawn across the dark, a thing a trained eye could learn to read, which is why the same people who imagined a sea beneath the world also stood on their temple towers and invented the watching of the sky. And above the stars, higher heavens still, floor upon floor, up to the topmost one where the oldest god sat, as far above the surface as the house of the dead lay below it. You were living, they believed, on the middle floor of an enormous house. Look up, and the floors climbed past the stars. Look down, past the wells, past the sweet water, and the floors went down into the dark, and at the very bottom of all of them was the one room that no one ever visited twice. And the deep did not only hold water, it held wisdom, and in the oldest memory of these people it once gave that wisdom up. Before the flood, they said, in the very first days of the first cities, beings came up out of the Abzu, out of Enki's sweet water, to teach. There were 7 of them, the 7 sages, and they were not quite men. They came up out of the water at the shore, and the old descriptions give them the bodies of fish, or a fish worn over the shoulders like a cloak with a human face looking out from beneath the head of it, and they walked up out of the deep into the first city and they taught. They taught writing, and the measuring of the land, and the building of temples, and the working of metal, and the laws that let people live together in a city without tearing each other apart. They gave, in short, everything that turns a crowd of people into a civilization, and they asked for nothing, and in the evening they went back down into the water and spent the night in the deep, because that was where they belonged. 7 sages, rising out of the floor below the world, handing up the whole of knowledge and sinking back down at dusk. And then, after the great flood, they stopped coming. The door of the deep, in a sense, closed. What came after the sages were only men, scholars, people who had to learn the hard way what the sages had simply handed over. And the age when wisdom walked up out of the water was over and did not return. So hold both of these together as we go down, because it tells you how these people felt about what was beneath them. The world below had two faces. There was the Abzu, the sweet water just under the ground, the source of springs and wisdom and life, the floor that had once sent its sages up to lift humanity out of the mud. And then, deeper than that, below even the giving water, there was the other below, the one that never gave anything up, the one that only received, down and down past the reach of any well. So that is the first floor down. The Abzu, the sweet water, Enki's house, and above it the first city. But the Abzu is not where the dead go. The Abzu is water and wisdom and life. To reach the place these people truly feared, you have to go deeper still, down past the fresh water, down to the bottom floor of the whole standing universe, to the land they called by many names and returned from by none. They called it the Kur. They called it the Irkala. They called it Arali, and Ganzir, and the great below, and the land of no return, and the house of dust. And to get to it, the tablets are clear. You go down. There is a road, and the road leads down, and there is a long stair, and the stair goes down into the dark, and at the bottom of the stair there is a wall, and in the wall there is a gate, and the gate is bolted from the other side. Let me tell you what they believed it was like in there, because they told us in plain words on a tablet that has survived, and the words are some of the oldest description of death that our species has ever written down. It is a dark house, they said. It is the house that people enter but cannot leave. It sits on the road that runs one way only, the road you go down and do not come back up. Those who live there sit in the dark. They never see light. Dust is the food they eat, and clay is the bread they are given. They are dressed like birds, in coats of feathers, and over the door and over the bolt that holds the door, the dust lies thick and undisturbed, because the door does not open. Stay for a breath inside that one image the tablet gives us, of the dead dressed like birds, clothed in feathers. It is a strange and haunting picture, and no one is entirely sure what the poets meant by it. Perhaps it was how the dead came to them in dreams, gray and light and faintly rustling. Perhaps it was the old and almost universal feeling that the thing which leaves the body at death is a bird, that the soul flies. Whatever they meant, it gives the house of dust its particular hush, a dim hall full of gray feathered shapes sitting motionless in the stillness, and someone moving among them with a tablet. Because the keeper of the record had a name of her own in some of the tellings. Beletseri, they called her, the lady of the open steppe. And she knelt before the throne of the queen, with the great tablet of the dead across her knees, reading out the names of the newly arrived, and entering each one into the register of the country below. Picture her going through that feathered crowd in the dark, writing down name after name after name, the patient clerk of a place that never closes and never empties, that only fills and fills and fills. Sit with that for a moment before we go on, because there is something in it that the later stories lost. There is no fire here. There is no torment, no punishment, no lake of flame, no demon with a pitchfork. That is all much later and much further away, and it belongs to other books. Here, at the bottom of the oldest world, there is only dust and dimness and a terrible quiet, and it is the same for everyone. This is the thing that these people believed and that we find so hard to sit with. The king and the slave went to the same house. The good and the wicked ate the same dust. There was no sorting at the door, no weighing of the heart, no separating of one crowd from another. Everyone went down. Everyone sat in the dark, and what small comfort a dead person could have came, not from how they had lived, but from something much simpler, which we will come to, and which is one of the strangest and most human ideas in the whole of this record. Getting down there was a journey, and the tablets kept a little of its geography. The road ran downward and toward the west, toward the place the sun goes at evening, down through a country that grew drier and emptier the further you went, until you came to water again, but not the sweet water of home. A river lay across the way, and you had to cross it to reach the far shore where the dead lived, and it was not a river you could simply wade. In some tellings it was a hungry water, a man-eating river that would take you if you touched it wrong. And there was a ferryman, as there so often is in these old stories, a boatman of the dead who kept the crossing, and no one passed to the other side without him. Almost every people who ever pictured the land of the dead put a river in front of it, and a boatman on the river, and this, pressed into the clay of the oldest cities on earth, is among the very first forms of that idea we have. A road down, a last dry country, a dark river, a boatman, and only then the far shore, and the wall, and the gate. And it was a wall with more than one door in it. Some of the old descriptions name not a single gate but a whole series of them, and behind the gates a great city of the dead, laid out, the tablets say, like a city of the living, with streets and a wall around it, and at its heart a palace, the house of the queen, called Ganzir, a name that could itself mean the gate, the threshold you crossed to come into her presence. The dead were not scattered loose in some empty void. They were gathered, and walled and kept, in a dark mirror of the cities they had come from, under the same kind of ruler, behind the same kind of gate, under the same kind of law, only with no road leading back out. The gate at the bottom of the stair had a keeper. His name was Neti, and he was the chief doorman of the underworld, and nobody passed him without leave from the one he served. You would come down out of the light, down the long stair, and you would stand in front of that bolted gate, and you would knock. And a voice would ask you who you were and why you had come, and whatever you answered, you would not be let straight through, because this was not a single gate. Behind the first gate was a second. Behind the second, a third. 7 gates in all, one behind another, each one bolted, each one with the same slow ceremony of opening, and at each gate something was taken from you. And it was 7, always 7, and that was not an accident. 7 ran through the whole of how these people saw the deep, 7 gates going down, 7 judges on their thrones, 7 demons that Nergal loosed on the world. The dead hung 3 days, and the storms of the flood ran 7, and again in these texts the important things come in 7s, because 7, to them, was the number of a thing made complete, a thing done fully and finally, the whole of something with nothing left over. So to pass through 7 gates was not simply to pass through a lot of doors, it was to be completely undone, taken apart all the way, until nothing of what you had been was left. 7 was the number of the whole journey down, the full and final stripping, the complete crossing from the world of the living into the world of the dead, with no piece of you held back on the near side. We will walk through all 7 of them tonight, slowly, one at a time, because the greatest of all these stories is the story of someone who went down through those 7 gates while still alive, and what was taken from her at each one, and what happened to her at the bottom, and the price that had to be paid to bring her back up. But before we meet her, you should meet the ones who were waiting for her down there. Because the house of dust was not empty, and it was not unruled. It had a court, and a throne, and on the throne there was a queen. Her name was Ereshkigal, and she is one of the oldest and loneliest figures in all of human storytelling, and we are going to spend a little while with her now, in the dark at the bottom of the world, while the dust settles over the bolt and the light in your room goes lower still. Ereshkigal was the queen of the great below. Her name means the lady of the great earth. And the great earth here does not mean the fields and the hills. It means the earth underneath the earth, the whole vast floor of the dead. She ruled it from a palace at the very bottom, a house called Ganzir, and she ruled it alone for a very long time. The other gods lived up in the light. They visited each other. They quarreled and feasted and married and made up. She did not. She stayed below, in the dust with the dead for her subjects, and the tablets that show her again and again in the same posture, grieving or in pain, or in a fury that has nowhere to go. She is not evil. That is important, and it is a thing the later stories could not keep. She is not a devil. She is a queen doing a hard and lonely job at the bottom of the world. And the sadness that comes off her in these texts is one of the reasons they still reach us. She had a household. Every court does. Her steward, her right hand, the one who carried out her orders, was a god named Namtar, and Namtar was fate itself, and he was also disease. His name means something like the cutting of the thread, the fixing of the doom, and when he was sent up into the world of the living he came as sickness, as the fever that takes a child in the night, as the plague that empties a street. He commanded 60 diseases, the tablet says, and he could set them on a body one by one. When Namtar came to your door, your time had been decided, and there was no appeal, because he was not cruelty. He was simply the moment your name came up on the list, and around the throne stood the judges. There were 7 of them, and they were called the Anunnaki, and that word will trip some of you, because you have heard it used for something else, for sky gods, for the makers of humanity, for, in the modern retellings, visitors from another planet. But down here the word has an older and simpler weight. The Anunnaki are the great old gods, the ones who decide, and in the underworld they are the ones who decide the last thing of all. 7 of them sat in judgment, and the tablet has a chilling little phrase for what they did. They fixed the eye of death upon you. That was the sentence. Not a speech, not a scale, not a list of your sins read back to you. A look. 7 ancient beings turn and fix their eyes on you, and the eye they turn is the eye of death, and that is the end. Everything in that court was written down, because these were the people who had invented writing in the first place to keep accounts, and they could not imagine even the underworld being run without records. Ereshkigal kept a scribe, a deity whose task was the great tablet of the dead, the ledger of everyone who had come down and everything that was owed, and in some texts the one who keeps that book is Inanna, the same faithful sister we will meet later, the one who went down in her brother's place. Set now to the endless work of writing the names of the dead in the dark. Consider that for a moment. The one who descended out of love became the keeper of the register, the book of the whole country of the dead, name after name after name, with no last page, and the dead in that ledger were fed on nothing. That is the detail the tablets keep circling back to, the thing that made the place so bleak in their eyes. Dust was the bread and clay was the meat, and they sat in the dark dressed in feathers like birds, and over all of it lay the fine gray dust that never stirred, because nothing stirred down there. No wind, no weather, no morning and no evening, only the one long dimness that never lifted and never darkened. It was not fire and it was not torture. It was worse than either in a quiet way. It was the going out of everything that makes a day, forever. There was one visitor to that court who came every single night, and then left again before dawn, and he is the thread that ties the world above to the world below, so hold on to him. It was the sun. To these people the sun was a god, called Utu in the south and Shamash in the north, and he did not simply vanish at sunset and reappear at sunrise. He went somewhere in between. He went down. Every evening the sun entered the underworld in the west, and every night he traveled through it, all the way through the land of the dead, from the western gate to the eastern one, and came up again in the morning on the far side, which means that once a night, in the deepest dark, the one bright thing in all creation passed through the house of dust. The dead saw him go by. For a few hours the sun was down there with them, and one old text even has him holding a kind of court as he passes, judging the dead, lighting for a moment a place that has no other light. And then he moves on, and rises into your morning, and the dark closes back over the house behind him. And because the sun alone crossed between the two worlds, going down among the dead each night, and rising among the living each morning, he became something more than a light. He became the judge of both. Utu, or Shamash in the north, was the god of justice precisely because he was the god who sees everything, since the sun goes everywhere and looks into everything, into the courtyard and the alley and the open country, where crimes are done in the belief that no one is watching. And so people prayed to him for fairness, and the wronged appealed to him, and even the dead, it was believed, could bring their case to him as he passed through their country in the night. A person who had been murdered and left unburied, a ghost with a grievance, could lay it before the sun as he came through the dark, and the sun would carry that appeal up into the light and see it answered among the living. Imagine that, as you lie there. Once a night the one bright thing in creation walks the whole length of the house of dust, and the dead lift their faces to it, and some of them are not only warming themselves for an hour in the only light they will ever get, but pleading, handing up their unfinished business to the one visitor who will climb back out into the morning, and might set it right. That is the country we are in tonight. A bottom floor of the world, ruled by a lonely queen, staffed by fate and disease, judged by 7 old gods with a single terrible look, visited once a night by the passing sun, and filled, endlessly, with the quiet dusty crowd of everyone who has ever died. Now let me tell you about the one who went down there on purpose, alive, in all her jewelry, and knocked on the gate. Her name was Inanna. She was the queen of heaven, the brightest and fiercest of all the gods of the surface, the goddess of love and of war, which these people did not find strange to put in one body, and she was the morning star and the evening star, which is to say, she was the planet we call Venus, the one that goes down under the horizon and stays gone and then returns. And one day, for reasons the tablet only half explains, Inanna set her mind on the great below. She decided to go down. She, of all of them, the one who belonged most completely to the light, turned toward the one place the gods did not go, and began to prepare. The reason she gave, when she was asked at the gate, was a funeral. Her sister's husband had died, a god called Gugalana, the great bull of heaven, and Inanna said she had come down to attend his funeral rites, to stand with her grieving sister and see him buried properly, as was right. And perhaps that was true. But the tablet lets you feel a second reason underneath the first, and the way the story turns suggests that Ereshkigal felt it too. Inanna was the queen of heaven. She ruled the sky and the morning and the evening star. She held title after title, domain after domain, more than any other goddess. And there was exactly one country she did not rule, one realm that was closed to her, and it was this one. So when the brightest and most ambitious of all the gods suddenly comes down, uninvited, into the one place she has never held, dressed not for mourning but in her full regalia, in her crown and her jewels and her robe of power, with her measuring rod and line in her hand, the tools a ruler uses to survey and claim, you can understand why the queen of the dead did not receive her as a grieving sister. You can understand why she bolted the 7 gates, because it looked less like a visit of condolence and more like a queen arriving to take possession, and the underworld does not change hands, and the one who comes to seize it, even a goddess, is stripped at the gates like anyone else and hung on the wall to rot. She dressed for it, and the dressing matters, so listen to what she put on, because you are going to watch it all come off again. On her head she set the crown of the open country. Across her forehead she arranged the dark locks of her hair. She hung a small measuring rod and a measuring line of lapis lazuli at her side, the tools of a queen who sets boundaries and judges. Around her neck she wound a string of lapis beads, and across her breast she fastened a double strand of stones. She pulled a gold ring onto her wrist. She wrapped herself in the royal robe, the pala, the garment of power, and covered in all of it, armored in her own splendor, she left the heavens and started down. She was not a fool. She knew where she was going. Before she left, she took her most trusted servant aside, a faithful minister named Ninshuber, and she gave careful instructions. "If I do not come back," she said, "do not wait. Go up to the gods, one after another, and beg them for me. Make a lament. Beat the drum for me in the assembly. Tear it yourself. Dress in a single rough garment like a beggar, and go to the great gods, and plead until one of them helps." She named which gods to try, and in what order, and then, having arranged her own rescue in advance, she turned and went down into the dark, because that is the kind of goddess she was, careful and reckless in the same breath. She came to the outer gate of the underworld, and she struck it, and she shouted to be let in. "Open the house," she cried. "Open the house, gatekeeper, open the house. Neti, open and let me in." And Neti, the keeper, did not open. He asked who she was, and she told him a story, a reason for coming that was not quite the truth. And Neti said, "Wait." And he went down, inside, to his mistress, to Ereshkigal, and he told her that her sister was standing at the door in all her finery, crown and rod and beads and ring and royal robe, asking to come in. And something moved in Ereshkigal when she heard it. The tablet says she bit her lip. She grew pale. Some old grief or old fear went through her. And then she gave her keeper his orders, and the orders are the heart of the whole story. "Bolt the 7 gates of the underworld," she said, "then open them to her, one at a time. And at each gate, as she comes through, take one thing from her. Strip the Queen of Heaven as she descends." So Neti went back up to the first gate, and he opened it, and he let Inanna in, and as she stepped through, he reached out and lifted the crown of the open country from her head. And she said, "What is this?" And he gave her the only answer he would ever give, the same answer at every gate, the answer that is meant to stop the questions and settle the descending soul into the way things are. "Be quiet, Inanna," he said. "The ways of the underworld are perfect. They must not be questioned." She went on to the second gate, and it opened, and as she passed through, he took the small measuring rod and the line of lapis from her side. And she said, "What is this?" And he said, "Be quiet, Inanna. The ways of the underworld are perfect. They must not be questioned." At the third gate, he took the string of beads from around her neck. "Be quiet, Inanna." At the fourth gate, he took the double strand of stones from across her breast. "The ways of the underworld are perfect." At the fifth gate, he took the gold ring from her wrist. "They must not be questioned." At the sixth gate, he took the measuring line, the last of her instruments of power. And at the seventh gate, the last gate, the one that opens into the throne room itself, he took the royal robe from her body, the pala, the garment of the queen, and she stepped through the seventh gate into the presence of her sister with nothing on her at all. No crown, no jewels, no robe, no rank. Everything that had said she was Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, had been lifted from her one piece at a time on the way down, and she came before the throne of the dead the way everyone comes there in the end, stripped, bare, and equal. You can hear, in that slow undressing, what these people understood about dying. It is not one door. It is a series of them, and at each one you give something up, and you cannot keep any of it, and the giving up is not cruel. It is simply the rule, the perfect and unquestionable rule of the place. The crown goes, the tools of your work go, the ornaments that made you beautiful go, the robe that said who you were goes, and what arrives at the bottom is just the bare thing that was underneath all of it the whole time, and what waited for that bare thing at the bottom was not mercy. Ereshkigal rose from her throne, and the 7 judges, the Anunnaki, were seated around her, and they turned toward Inanna and they fixed on her the eye of death. Ereshkigal spoke against her the word of wrath. And Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, the brightest of all the gods, was struck down and turned into a corpse, a piece of dead and rotting meat. And they took the corpse and they hung it on a hook that was driven into the wall, and there she hung, in the dark, in the throne room at the bottom of the world, going the way all meat goes. 1 day passed, 2 days passed, and on the surface, in the light, her faithful servant Ninshubur waited and counted, and when 3 days and 3 nights had gone by and his mistress had not returned, he did exactly what she had told him to do. Ninshubur dressed himself in a single rough garment, the way you dress for mourning, the way the poorest person in the city dresses, and he went up to the great gods, one after another, exactly as his mistress had told him. He went first to Enlil, the lord of the air, the chief of the gods on the surface, and he set up a lament in front of him. "Father Enlil," he said, "do not let your daughter be put to death in the underworld. Do not let your bright silver be covered with the dust of that place. Do not let her be broken there like a cheap stone." And Enlil would not help. He was annoyed, the way the powerful are annoyed by a problem they did not make. She wanted the great below, Enlil said. She reached for it herself. Whoever reaches for the underworld does not simply climb back out. She knew the rule. And he turned away. So Ninshubur went to the next god, to Nana, the moon, the father of Inanna herself, and he made the same lament, word for word, the whole of it again, and Nana gave him the same answer. She wanted it. She reached for it. The one who reaches for the great below does not come back up. Turn away. And here you feel the loneliness of the descending soul, because even her own father, the moon, will not go down after her. Even he says the rule is the rule. 2 of the highest gods in the sky have shrugged and looked away, and Inanna is still hanging on the hook in the dark, and there is only one god left to try, and it is, as it always is, the same one. The one who lives at the first floor down, the one in the sweet water. Enki, Ninshubur came to Enki and made his lament a 3rd time, and Enki did not turn away. The tablet says he was troubled. "What has happened to my daughter?" he said. "I am worried. What has happened to Inanna?" And he did not lecture anyone about the rules of the underworld. He simply went to work, the way he always does, quietly, cleverly, with his hands. He reached under his own fingernail and took out a little of the dirt that was there, and from that scraping of dirt he made a creature. And then he did it again, from under the other nail, and made a 2nd one. They were small, and they were strange, and the word the tablet uses for them suggests they were neither male nor female, neither one thing nor the other, and that mattered, because a thing that is neither one nor the other can slip through a gate that a proper person cannot. He called the first one the Kurgara, and the second the Galatura, and to one he gave the food of life, and to the other the water of life. And he gave them their instructions, and the instructions are the cleverest and gentlest thing in the whole story. He did not tell them to fight their way in. He did not tell them to trick the guards or force the gates. He told them to go down to the underworld like flies through the crack of a door, small and unnoticed, and to go to Ereshkigal, the queen, and there, he said, you will find her in pain, because Ereshkigal was suffering. In some versions she is groaning like a woman giving birth. In others, she is simply in the endless raw grief that is her whole existence, lying there moaning, "Oh my insides, oh my body." And Enki told his 2 little creatures exactly what to do about that. When she cries out, "Oh my insides," you are to cry out with her, "Oh your insides." When she moans, "Oh my body," you are to moan back, "Oh your body." Match her. Grieve when she grieves, ake where she aches. Do not ask her for anything. Just be the first thing in the history of the underworld to sit with the queen of the dead in her pain and say, "Yes, I feel it too." And they did. They slipped down through all the gates like a draught of air, and they came to Ereshkigal writhing on her bed, and when she groaned, "Oh my insides," the 2 little creatures groaned, "Oh your insides." When she cried, "Oh my back," they cried, "Oh your back." Whatever came out of her, they gave it back to her, softened, shared, witnessed. and the queen of the dead, who had ruled that place alone for longer than there had been anything to measure time with, who had never once been comforted by anyone, stopped, and she looked at these two odd small beings who were sitting in her dark grieving along with her, and something in her opened, and she said, "Whoever you are, you who have grieved with me from my insides to my back, if you are gods, I will bless you, and if you are mortals, I will give you a gift. Ask me for anything." They had been told what to ask for. "Do not take the offer of the river in its high water," Enki had warned them. "Do not take the offer of the field in its grain. Do not let her buy you off with the good things of the world. Ask only for one thing. Ask for the piece of meat hanging on the hook on the wall." And so they said it. "Give us the corpse that hangs from the hook." And Ereshkigal, who had promised, said, "That corpse is your queen." And they said, "Whether it is our queen or not, give it to us." And she gave it to them. They took the body down off the hook. They sprinkled the food of life on it. They sprinkled the water of life on it. And Inanna stood up. But the underworld does not simply let go. This is the part that the 7 gates were always leading toward. The rule underneath all the other rules. Nobody leaves the great below without a reason, and the only reason the underworld accepts is a replacement. "You may go up," they told her, "but the custom of the underworld must be kept. If you are to rise, you must provide someone to take your place." And they gave her an escort to make sure that she did. A crowd of demons rose up out of the underworld and came with her. And these demons, the Gala, are worth stopping on, because they are the pure cold machinery of the place with all the sadness stripped out. The Gala know no food. They know no drink. They eat no offering and they drink no libation. They accept no gift. They take no bribe. They have no pleasure and no appetite of their own, and so there is nothing you can give them to make them go away, which is exactly what makes them terrible. The tablet describes what they do, and it is the plainest description of grief ever written. They tear the wife from the husband's arms. They tear the child from the father's knee. They take the bride out of her new home. They snatch the son. They are the thing that arrives and takes a person out of the middle of their life, out of the arms of everyone holding on to them, and cannot be reasoned with, because they want nothing except the one thing they came for. And this cloud of demons rose up around Inanna and climbed with her, back up through the 7 gates. And at each gate she took back what had been taken from her on the way down: the robe, the ring, the beads, the rod and line, the crown, so that she came up out of the earth dressed again as the Queen of Heaven, alive, restored in all her splendor, with a mob of the undead pressed close around her waiting to be paid, because someone still had to go down in her place. The demons went with her while she looked for the one to leave behind, and they were not patient about it. At the first city they came to, her minister Ninshuber, the faithful one, the one who had climbed to every god and begged and never given up on her, threw himself in the dust at her feet, still in his mourning rags. And the demon said, "We will take this one. Step aside, Inanna, and we will carry him down in your place, and you go free." And Inanna said, "No, not this one. This is the one who saved me. This is the one who lamented for me, who beat the drum for me in the assembly, who would not let me stay dead. I will not hand him over." And the demons let him go, and they moved on. At the next city it was the same. There was a god there named Shara, who was hers, a kind of son to her, and when he saw her he threw himself down in the dust in his dirty clothes, in mourning for her. And the demons said, "We will take this one." And she said, "No, not this one either. He cut his hair and scratched his skin in grief for me," and they let him go. And at a third place it happened again with a god named Lulal, who was also grieving for her in the dust, and again she refused. And the demons, growing hungrier, went on with her, all of them together, until they came at last to her own city, to Uruk, to the great apple orchard of her home, to the seat of her own house. And there was her husband. His name was Dumuzi. And he was not in the dust. He was not in mourning. He was not dressed in rags, and his hair was not torn, and his face was not gray with weeping for a dead wife. He was sitting on his throne, in a fine clean garment, raised up on his royal seat, comfortable, untroubled, while she had been hanging on a hook in the dark. And Inanna looked at him. The tablet says she fixed on him the eye of death, the same look the 7 judges had fixed on her, the eye she had barely survived. She now turned on her own husband. "This one," she said, "take him." And the demons, who had been kept waiting through 3 refusals, seized Dumuzi where he sat. You may feel that is cruel, and it is, and the poem does not hide from that. But sit with what she is looking at. She went down into death. Everyone who loved her felt it. Her servant tore his clothes. Her son scratched his own skin. 2 other gods threw themselves in the dust. The whole world she was connected to bent under her absence, except the one man who was supposed to feel it most, and he was sitting on her throne in clean clothes doing very well for himself. It is the oldest version of a wound everyone eventually knows in some smaller form. You suffer, and you find out who noticed, and you find out who did not, and it changes how you look at them forever. Dumuzi ran. He begged. He was a shepherd god, young and quick, and he prayed to the sun god Utu, his brother-in-law, the one who sees everything and goes everywhere, to save him. "Turn my hands into the hands of a snake," he prayed. "Turn my feet into the feet of a snake, so I can slip out of their grip and get away." And Utu had mercy on him and changed him, and Dumuzi slid out of the demon's hands and fled, and they chased him. He ran to the house of his sister. He ran across the open country. He changed his shape and hid, and they found him. He hid again, and they found him again, because the Gala know no food, and know no drink, and know no rest, and a thing that never tires will always, in the end, catch a thing that does. And they caught him, and they took him down. There is more to Dumuzi's flight than a simple chase, and it is worth slowing down for, because the old poems dwell on it with a strange tenderness for a young god who did wrong and was caught. Before the demons ever reached him, Dumuzi dreamed. He lay down out in the grazing land among his sheep, and he had a dream that frightened him so badly he called for his sister to come and read it, because she was wise in dreams. In the dream, he told her, "The rushes rose up around me and then were torn out by the roots. The tall reed that stood alone over me bent its head. In the sheepfold the churn lay silent on its side, and the drinking cup hung from its peg and then fell. My shepherd's crook was gone. An owl was in the fold." And his sister, Inanna, listened, and she did not comfort him with a lie. "My brother," she said, "your dream is not good. The rushes torn up are the men who will come for you. The reed bending its head is our mother, who will bow her head for you. The churn lying silent, the cup fallen from the peg, these are the Gala, and they are coming, and they will take you from the fold." And they came, exactly as she had read them. Dumuzi ran out into the wild country and prayed to the sun god to change his hands and his feet into the hands and feet of a gazelle so he could bound away. And the sun had mercy and changed him. And he ran, and still they came, because the Gala know no weariness. He hid, and he was betrayed. A friend, someone who knew where he was, gave him up to the demons, in some tellings for a bribe, and in some simply out of fear. And that betrayal by someone close is part of why the story stayed so raw to the people who told it. They ran him down at last in the sheepfold, at his own folds among his own animals, and when they seized him, the churns did fall silent, and the cup did fall from its peg. And the milk itself, the poets say, went sour in the pails, because the shepherd of the land was being dragged down into the dust, and the whole gentle economy of the fold stopped with him. And that would be the end of it, a straight, sad exchange, one life up and one life down, except for one person, and she is the quiet heart of the whole story, and almost nobody knows her name. Dumuzi had a sister. Her name was Inanna, And when her brother was taken down into the underworld, she did something that no one in the story had done for anyone. She went looking for him. She grieved for him so completely, she searched for him so far, that when she finally understood he was in the land of the dead, she offered to go down in his place, not to escape anything herself. She was not the one being hunted. She simply could not bear where he was, and she offered the underworld the one thing it always wants, a substitute, and the substitute was herself. And so a bargain was struck, and it is the bargain that runs the world. Dumuzi would not stay below forever, and Inanna would not stay below forever. They would share it. Half the year Dumuzi would be in the underworld and his sister would walk in the light, and then they would trade. He would come up and she would go down, and for the other half of the year she would sit among the dead while he walked in the sun. Brother and sister, forever passing each other at the gate, one always going down as the other comes up, so that neither is ever wholly lost and neither is ever wholly free. And that, to these people, was the year. That was the green coming up out of the ground in the spring, when the shepherd god returned, and the dry brown death of the late summer when he went back down and the fields burned, and nothing grew. The seasons were a brother and a sister taking turns being dead. Every farming people that has ever lived has told some version of this story, a figure who goes down into the earth and comes back up, a seed that has to be buried before it can grow, a green thing that dies every year and every year returns, and this, on these tablets, in this language, is the oldest form of it we have. Everything downstream of it, every dying and rising figure in every later religion around that whole sea, is in some sense a grandchild of a shepherd on a throne who did not mourn his wife, and the sister who went down into the dark so that he could see the sun again. And this was not only a story that people told, it was a grief they returned to on purpose every single year, because when the hot dry season came, and the pastures browned and the green went out of the land, that was Dumuzi going down again into the earth, and the people mourned him for it, openly, in the streets and at the temples. There were songs of lamentation, sung mostly by the women, long aching laments for the young shepherd god taken down into the dust, for the bridegroom lost, for the one who goes into the ground. Year after year they wept him down. And then, when the season turned and the rains came back and the green rose again out of the dead ground, that was his return, his sister trading places with him at the gate, and the weeping turned to rejoicing. This mourning for the god who goes into the earth was so old and so deep and so widespread that it outlasted the Sumerians and the Babylonians entirely. Far away and centuries later in the city of Jerusalem, one of the Hebrew prophets was shown as a scandal, the women sitting at the north gate of the very temple, weeping for Tammuz, which was the later name of Dumuzi, still mourning the shepherd going down into the ground, thousands of years and hundreds of miles from the marshes where the story began. A whole world of people, generation after generation, weeping a god down into the earth every summer and welcoming him back up every spring, living the descent and the return with their own tears, over and over. Because it was not only his story, it was the story of every seed and every harvest, and in the end every person they had ever put into the ground. So the Queen of Heaven came back from the dead. It cost the life of her husband and half the life of his sister, and it left her changed, and it set the seasons turning, and it taught these people the thing they most needed to believe, which is that going down into the earth is not always the end, that there is for some a way back up, but that the way back is never free and someone always pays. There is a second telling of that descent, and you should hear it before we go on, because it was told later, far to the north, in Babylon, in a harder and colder age, and in it the goddess is called Ishtar, and the story has an edge that the older one does not. Ishtar comes down to the gate of the land of no return, and she does not knock politely. She calls out to the keeper, and she says, "Open the gate for me, and if you do not open it, I will smash the door and shatter the bolt. I will smash the doorpost and tear the door from its hinges, and I will raise up the dead. And they will rise and eat the living, and I will make the dead outnumber the living. It is the most terrible threat in all of these texts, and it is the one power the world below truly holds over the world above, the threat to simply open the door and let the dead come up. And the keeper, frightened, goes down to tell his queen, and Ereshkigal, when she hears it, does the same thing her southern self did. She turns pale, she bites her lip, and she gives the same order. Let her in, and take something at every gate. And so Ishtar too is stripped gate by gate 7 times over, the great crown from her head, the rings from her ears, the beads from her neck, the ornaments from her breast, the belt of birthstones from her waist, the bands from her wrists and ankles, and at the last gate the final garment from her body, until she stands before the throne with nothing, and Ereshkigal looses against her the eye of death, and Ishtar is held fast in the land of no return. But here the Babylonian tellers added something the older story did not have, and it is unforgettable. While Ishtar is trapped below, the world above stops. Because she is the goddess of desire, of the force that draws living things together and makes more of them. And with her shut in the dark, that force simply switches off across the whole surface of the earth. The bull will not mount the cow, the donkey will not approach the jenny, the man does not lie with the woman, nothing reaches for anything. Nothing new is conceived, in the fields or the byres or the beds of the cities, and the world begins quietly to run down toward barrenness, one childless season away from ending altogether. And it is that, not pity, that finally moves the gods to act, because a world where nothing is born is a world with a deadline. So the clever one, the god of the sweet water, the same Enki we have followed all night, does what he always does. He makes something. He takes clay or he takes nothing, and he shapes a being, and in this version it is a creature of pure beauty, a being made to be irresistible, and its name means something like its face is radiant. And he sends this shining creature down to the queen of the dead with instructions to charm her, to delight her, to make her swear a great oath in her pleasure before she understands what she has promised. And it works. Ereshkigal, charmed, swears by the great gods, and once she has sworn she cannot take it back, and the Shining One asks for the one thing it was sent to win, the water skin that holds the water of life. And she knows in that instant that she has been tricked, and she is furious. And she curses the beautiful creature with a terrible curse, that its food will be the bread of the gutters and its drink the runoff of the city drains, that it will live in the doorway and sleep on the threshold, that the drunk and the thirsty will strike its cheek. But the oath is sworn and cannot be unsworn. They take the water of life, and they sprinkle it on Ishtar, and she rises. And she is led back up through the 7 gates, and at each one they give her back what was taken, the last garment, the bands, the belt, the beads, the rings, the crown, until she comes up out of the earth clothed and alive, and behind her the world slowly remembers how to reach for itself again, and things begin, once more, to be born. Even the greatest of the sky gods went down into that country once, not as a visitor and not as a prisoner, but as an exile, condemned. In the beginning, at the city of Nippur, the young god Enlil, the lord of the air, saw a young goddess named Ninlil bathing in the pure canal, and he wanted her, and she told him she was too young, that her time had not come, that her mother and father would hear of it. And Enlil did not listen, and he lay with her by the water, and from that came a child, the bright god of the moon. But the great gods of the city were not pleased. They judged that Enlil had defiled the water and the girl, and though he was their chief, their king, they passed sentence on him as they would on anyone, and the sentence was banishment. Enlil, lord of the air, was declared unclean and driven out of his own city, and the road of the banished led downward toward the underworld, and Ninlil, carrying his child, followed him down. And here the story turns strange and tender in a way only these very old poems manage. Enlil did not want his son, the bright moon, to be born in the land of the dead. For a thing born below belongs below and cannot come up. So as he went down the road, he took the form of the gatekeeper of the city. And when Ninlil caught up to him and asked the gatekeeper where the god Enlil had gone, he answered her as the gatekeeper, and lay with her again, and from that second joining another child was conceived, one who could stay below in the moon god's place, a ransom to the underworld so that the moon could rise. And further down the road Enlil took the form of the man-eating river, and it happened again, and another underworld god was conceived. And at the dark river itself he took the form of the ferryman of the dead. And again, and a third, 3 shadow children begotten on the way down, one after another, each one left as a substitute in the dark, so that the one bright child, the moon, could be born and climb up into the sky where you can still see him. It is the first story of a god changing his shape that human beings ever wrote down, and underneath its strangeness is the same iron law we keep meeting at every gate. Nothing comes up from below for free. The underworld always takes its price, and the price is always a life left in the dark, in place of the life that rises. But every one of these was a god, and for a god even a descent into death can be, in the end, only a kind of visit. To understand what the underworld truly meant to an ordinary person, someone with no Enki to send creatures of clay after them, someone who was simply going to die and stay dead like everyone they had ever buried, we have to leave the gods for a while. We have to go and stand in that country not as a visiting queen but as one of the permanent residents. And for that, we need the report of a man who went down and for one strange hour was allowed to come back up and describe it. There is a small story about how that drum came to fall into the underworld in the first place, and it is worth telling, because it begins with a tree and with a goddess we already know. Long ago, the poem says, a single young tree grew on the bank of the Euphrates, a hulapu tree, and the south wind tore it loose, and the river carried it away. And Inanna found it drifting on the water, and lifted it out, and carried it to her garden in the city of Uruk, and planted it there, meaning one day, when it was grown, to cut from its wood a throne to sit on, and a bed to lie in. And the tree grew, for years it grew, but when at last she came to cut it, she found that she could not, because others had moved in. Down in its roots a serpent that no charm could touch had made its nest. Up in its branches the Abzu bird, the great storm bird, had settled its young. And in the trunk, in the very heart of the tree, a dark and restless spirit of the wild, lonely places had made her home. 3 of them, one in the roots, one in the crown, one in the middle, and Inanna could not drive out a single one, and she stood by her tree and wept. So she went to the hero, to Gilgamesh, and he came with his axe. He struck down the serpent that no charm could touch. The storm bird gathered its young and flew off to the mountains. The dark spirit fled to the wild places she had come from, and the tree stood free at last. Inanna cut it, and made from its wood the throne she had wanted and the bed she had wanted, and from what was left over, out of gratitude, she made 2 things and gave them to Gilgamesh, a drum and a stick to beat it with, or in some tellings a ball and a mallet to drive it. And it was that gift, made from the leftover wood of a floating tree, that would one day roll away across the ground and fall down through a crack into the underworld, and send Enkidu down after them and never give him back. So even the small wooden thing that pulled a living man down into the land of the dead, began with a tree in a river and a serpent in its roots and a goddess who wanted nothing more than a chair to sit on. Follow anything in this world back far enough, and it seems to lead down, in the end, to the same dark floor. The man was Enkidu, and to understand how he came to be standing at the edge of the underworld, we have to borrow him from the greatest story these people ever told, the story of the king Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk, 2/3 god and 1/3 man. And Enkidu was the wild man the gods made to be his equal and his friend, and the 2 of them were closer than brothers. That is all you need for tonight. There was a king, and there was the friend he loved most in the world, and the friend had a wooden drum and a wooden stick, or perhaps a ball and a mallet. The words are old, and we are not certain. And one day these things fell down through a hole in the ground, down into the underworld. And Enkidu said, I will go down and get them. Gilgamesh was afraid for him, and he gave him careful instructions, because to walk into the land of the dead while still alive is to walk into a place with rules, and if you break the rules the dead will notice you, and if the dead notice you they will keep you. Do not wear clean clothes, Gilgamesh told him, or they will know you are a stranger and gather around you. Do not put on fresh oil, or the dead will smell it and circle you. Do not carry a weapon, or the shades of those you have killed will crowd you. Do not raise your voice at anyone down there. Do not kiss the wife you love, and do not strike the wife you hate. Do not kiss the child you love, and do not strike the child you hate, because the grief of the underworld will seize you. Make yourself unnoticed. Go down quiet and plain and empty-handed, get the drum and the stick, and come straight back. And Enkidu went down, and he did every single thing he had been told not to do. He put on clean clothes, and the dead marked him as a stranger. He rubbed himself with sweet oil, and the shades gathered around the smell. He kissed the wife he loved and struck the wife he hated. He kissed the child he loved and struck the child he hated, and the grief of the underworld seized him. And the earth closed over him, and it would not give him back. Not the drum, not the stick, not Enkidu. The great below simply held on to him and did not let go. And Gilgamesh wept, and went from god to god begging for his friend, and the answer he got was the answer everyone gets, until he came once again to Enki. And Enki was willing. Enki spoke to the sun god, and the sun god opened a crack in the surface of the earth, a vent, a small opening between the world of the living and the world of the dead, and up through that crack, the tablet says, the shade of Enkidu drifted like a breath of wind. Not his body was gone, only the shade, the ghost, the Atemu, the thing in a person that continues after the flesh has stopped. And the two friends, the living king and the dead man's ghost, reached for each other and could not touch, and the poem lingers on that, on the arms that pass through each other. And then Gilgamesh, who has this 1 hour and no more, asks his friend the only question that matters. He asks him what it is like down there. Tell me, my friend, he says. Tell me the way of the underworld that you have seen. Tell me. And Enkidu says, I will not tell you, my friend, I will not tell you. If I told you the way of the underworld as I have seen it, you would sit down and weep. And Gilgamesh says, then let me sit down and weep. And Enkidu tells him, and what he describes is not fire, and it is not paradise, and it is not judgment. It is a strange, precise, quiet accounting, in which the comfort of the dead has nothing to do with whether they were good, and everything to do with two things: how many sons they left behind, and how they died. The man who left one son, Enkidu says, is in the underworld weeping bitterly at a single wooden peg driven into his wall, and you do not know quite why, but you feel it. The man who left 2 sons sits on 2 bricks and eats a piece of bread. The man who left 3 sons drinks water from a water skin slung on the saddle of the deep. The man who left 4 sons, his heart is glad, like a man with 4 donkeys yoked to his wagon. The man who left 5 sons is like a fine scribe with a nimble hand, and he walks into the palace of the underworld with no trouble at all. The man who left 6 sons is as cheerful as a farmer at plowing time, and the man who left 7 sons sits among the lesser gods themselves, on a throne, and listens to the music of the court. You hear what the measure is. It is not virtue, it is not a life well lived. It is sons, because sons are the ones who pour the water and set out the bread at the grave, and in this underworld you are fed, forever, by what your descendants remember to give you. The more children you leave who love you enough to keep pouring, the softer your seat in the dark. And so the accounting keeps going, downward, into the ones with no one. The man who left no air at all, Enkidu says, eats a loaf of bread as hard as a kiln-fired brick, because there is no one up in the light setting out anything softer for him. The woman who never gave birth is cast aside like a broken pot, used by no one, wanted by no one. The man with no one to make the offerings, whose family forgot him or died out, that man scrapes his food from the gutter. He eats the scraps and the crumbs that are thrown out into the street, because nothing is set out for him at any grave, and he must live on what the living drop by accident. And the spirit of the man whose body was left lying in the open country, never buried at all. That spirit finds no rest anywhere in the underworld. He wanders. He is the restless one, the Idimu, and in the belief of these people he was the one who came back up, hungry and angry, to trouble the living, because he had never been properly laid down. There is one turn in the list that is almost unbearably tender. The little ones, Enkidu says, the stillborn children, the babies who died before they had a name, before they had done anything, before they had lived at all. You would think they would have the worst of it, having been given nothing. And instead the poem says they play. They play at a table of gold and silver, laden with honey and fine butter, the food of the gods. The ones who never got to live are, in that dark place, the ones who are cared for, endlessly, at a bright table, as if the world owed them the childhood they never had and paid it back below. It is 4,000 years old, and it will still catch in your throat if you let it. And then, at the very end, comes the one fate that is worse than all the others, worse than the gutter, worse than the broken pot, worse than wandering unburied, and it is the last thing the tablet has to say before it breaks off, and it is the reason these people feared one particular kind of death above every other. Gilgamesh asks about the man who was burned, the man whose body was consumed by fire. And Enkidu says, I did not see him. His spirit is not there. He is not in the underworld at all. His smoke went up into the sky, and that was all of him, and there is nothing left below to sit in the dark or eat from the gutter or play at any table. He is simply gone, not suffering. Gone, erased so completely that even the house of dust, the land of no return, the worst place these people could imagine, has no room for him, because there is no him left to hold. Think about what that tells you. To these people, the underworld, dreadful as it was still existence. It was still you, still there, still able to be fed by the ones who loved you, still able, if you were lucky in your children, to sit somewhere almost comfortable and listen to music in the dark. The one truly unbearable thing, the only real oblivion, was to be undone entirely. To go up as smoke and not down as a shade. They would rather sit forever in the dust eating clay than not be anywhere at all. And that, more than any of the gates or any of the demons, is the thing the tablets are really telling you about how these people felt down in the deep of themselves. They did not most of all want heaven. They most of all did not want to disappear. It is worth asking what, exactly, they thought went down there, because it was not simply the body which they could see staying in the grave. A person, to these people, was made of more than one thing. There was the body, which failed, and was laid in the ground. And there was something else in a person, a breath, a spirit, a shade which they called the Atemu, and which did not die when the body did. In their oldest story of how humanity was made, that spark was not human at all in its origin. It was said to come from a god, mixed into the clay at the very beginning, so that every person carried inside them a little of the divine breath, a thing that had been alive before them and did not simply stop when the flesh stopped. That was the part that went down. The Atemu, the shade, drifted down the long road to the house of dust and took its place among the others, and it was still, in some real sense, the person, still able to be thirsty, still able to suffer or to rest. And there was a third thing that belonged to a person, lighter than the body and lighter than the shade, and that was the name. The name did not go down at all. The name stayed up in the light, in the mouths of the living, and as long as it was spoken, the person was not wholly gone, and when it stopped being spoken, something final happened. a second death, quieter than the first. So a person came apart, at the end, into three: the body to the ground, the shade to the dark below, and the name to the memory of the living, where it lived exactly as long as someone kept saying it, and no longer. There was one thin thread of comfort that ran down into all that dust, and we have already touched it without following it, and it is time now to follow it, because it is the most human thing in the whole of this belief. Remember what Enkidu said: the more sons a man left behind, the softer his seat in the dark, and the man with no one at all scraped his food from the gutter. That was not a throwaway line. It was the center of how these people lived with their dead, because the dead, they believed, still needed to eat and drink, and could not get food or water for themselves in the land of dust, and so the living had to send it down to them. And they did faithfully on a schedule for as long as anyone remembered them. It was a real practice with a name, and it was one of the deepest duties a person had. Once a month, and on certain feasts, and at the dark of the moon, the family would set out a meal for its dead. They would pour water, cool, clean water, the most precious thing to a parched shade in a waterless place, and they would lay out bread and whatever else the household had, and they would speak the names of the dead aloud, the father and the father's father, back as far as the memory of the family reached, calling each one and inviting them to come and receive their share. In many houses this was not done at some distant graveyard, but right there under the floor, because they often buried their dead beneath the family home, under the very rooms where the living slept and ate, so that the dead stayed close, still members of the household, still present, only lower down, and the offerings could be poured to them through a pipe of clay set into the ground, straight down to where they lay. Think about what that means. To these people, death was not a door that shut. It was a change of address to a lower and darker floor of the same house, and the family relationship simply carried on across that floor, with obligations running in both directions. The living owed the dead their food and their water, and above all the saying of their names, the refusal to let them be forgotten, and the dead, kept fed and kept named, could rest, and could even, some believed, look out for the family that looked after them, put in a good word below, keep the peace. But the thread ran the other way too, and that was the fear, because a shade who was not fed, a dead person whose family had died out or moved away or simply forgotten them, whose name no one spoke anymore and whose water no one poured, did not simply fade quietly. That shade grew hungry and thirsty and desperate, and it could come back up. This was the restless dead we met before, the ones who had died badly or been left unburied or been abandoned by the living, and a great deal of what these people feared in the way of sickness and misfortune. The fever that would not break, the run of ruin in a household, the child who wasted, was laid at the door of some hungry, forgotten dead thing that had come up out of neglect to take what it was owed. Their healers and their exorcists spent much of their skill trying to work out which dead one it was, and to feed it, or name it, or send it back down satisfied. So the whole of it, the offerings and the pipes and the graves beneath the floor and the monthly speaking of the names, was not only tenderness, though it was that. It was also a kind of maintenance, a keeping of the peace between the floor of the living and the floor of the dead, an understanding that the two worlds were joined by a thread of food and water and memory, and that if you let the thread break, the dark below did not stay below. And now you understand fully why Enkidu counted sons. A son was not just an heir. A son was the one who would pour the water when you were the one lying in the dust, the one who would say your name into the dark so that you would not become one of the hungry forgotten. To die with many who loved you was to die with your water secured. To die with no one was the real poverty, the one that followed you down and lasted forever. And the traffic on that thread was not only food going down. Sometimes the living reached the other way and tried to call the dead back up, not to stay, but to speak. Because if your father lay just under the floor, fed and named and close, then it did not seem impossible that on the right night, with the right words, you might get an answer. These people had specialists for it, people who knew how to raise a ghost, to summon an Atemu up out of the dust for a little while to ask it a question. You might ask it why it was troubling the house. You might ask it a family matter it had taken down with it. You might ask it about the future, because the dead, being outside of time in their dark country, were thought to see things the living could not. There were rituals to call a ghost up into a skull, or into a little figure made for the purpose, so that it could speak through it, and there was the older, gentler way. To go and sleep in a holy place, and hope the dead one came to you in a dream, where the boundary is always thinnest. If you have read the old story of the king who went by night to a woman who could call up the dead, and had her raise the shade of the prophet who had died, to ask him what would happen in the coming battle, then you have met a cousin of this practice, one that these people knew long before. And under all of it was the same double feeling we keep finding, the longing to hear one more time from the ones you had lost, and the fear, underneath, of what you might raise if you called into the dark and something answered. We have watched gods go down, and we have heard from one dead man what it is like to stay. There is one more descent worth telling before we meet the guardians, and it is the descent of a real king, a man whose name is carved on bricks you can still see, and whose journey down the poets followed all the way to the bottom. His name was Ur-Nammu, and he was one of the greatest kings the land ever had. He built the great ziggurat of Ur, the very tower that still stands in the desert today. And he gave the world one of its first written codes of law, and he ruled well and was loved. And then, out on a battlefield, he was abandoned and killed, and his body was brought back, and the poem that these people wrote about his death does not stop at the funeral. It goes down with him. It follows Ur-Nammu into the underworld, and it shows him doing what a great king does anywhere, arriving with gifts and paying his respects to the powers of the place. He presents offerings to each of the gods of the dead in turn, a fine bow and a quiver to one, a gift to Nergal, a gift to the queen Ereshkigal, a gift to Namtar the vizier of fate, to the gatekeeper, to the scribe of the dead, taking his proper place among them with the generosity of a king. And they hold a banquet for him, and for a moment it seems as though rank might follow a man down, as though a great king might be a great man even in the house of dust. And then the poem breaks your heart, because it does not let him keep it. After the gifts and the banquet, Ur-Nammu sits down in his place in the underworld, and he weeps. He weeps because for all his building and all his justice and all his gifts, his seat is still in the dust like everyone else's. He weeps for the wife he will not hold again and the city he will not see finished, for the walls left half-built and the roads left unmade, for the loyal people up in the light who are tearing their hair for him. He, who raised the tower that touched the sky, cries in the dark like any other shade, and the poem lets him, because that was the truth these people would not flinch from. Even the man who built the greatest thing in the world went down to the same dust as the poorest man in it, and no amount of greatness bought a softer floor. The tower he raised still stands in the sun. He does not. He is below it, in the dark, weeping, a king among the dead, which is to say, in the end, only one more of the dead. Stand back for a moment and notice the shape of what these people believed, because it is stranger than it first seems, and it is the thing modern people find hardest to sit with. In that whole vast country of the dead, there was no judgment. There were 7 judges, yes, but they did not weigh your life. They fixed the eye of death on you, and that was all, and once you were down there, the king and the murderer and the gentle mother and the thief all sat in the same dust and ate the same clay. No one was sent to a bright place for being good. No one was sent to a burning place for being wicked. There was no scale, as there was far to the west in Egypt, where they weighed the heart against a feather. There was no heaven and no hell in the sense the later world would fill with those words. Virtue, down there, bought you nothing at all. What bought you a softer seat was not how you had lived, but how many children you had left to pour your water, and how you had died, and whether anyone above still spoke your name. It was, if you think about it, less a moral universe than an administrative one, a vast dim office of the dead run on records and offerings and the keeping of accounts. And that tells you, in the end, what these people were really afraid of, and it was not punishment. A person can brace against punishment. What they could not bear was the other thing, the going out, the being forgotten, the dust closing over a name that no one says anymore. They did not most of all want to be judged well. They most of all wanted to still be there, and still be remembered, and still be fed. Now that you have stood among the dead and heard how they live, you should meet the ones who brought them there, and the ones who keep them, because the road down was guarded at every step, and the guardians are some of the oldest monsters our species ever imagined. We have already met the Gala, the demons who came up with Inanna, but they deserve a longer look, because they are not like any monster you know from later stories. They are not tempters. They do not want your soul, and they do not care whether you were good or wicked, because to them it makes no difference at all. The Gala are, more than anything, a kind of pure function. They are what comes for you when your time is reached, and the thing that makes them so frightening on the tablets is precisely that they cannot be moved. A wild animal can be frightened off. An enemy can be bribed or reasoned with or begged. But the Gala know no food and know no drink. They accept no offering. They take no gift. They feel no pity and no desire. There is nothing in the whole world that you have that they want, and so there is nothing you can put between yourself and them. They are described going into a house and taking the man out of it, and the way the tablet lists what they do is the way you would list the shapes of grief itself. They part the wife from the husband's embrace. They take the child down from the knee of the father. They drive the young man out of his own home. They are the empty chair after a funeral, given a body and a set of orders, and sent up the stairs to collect. Alongside them, in the dark corridors of the deep, were other things. There were the Utuku, a whole class of spirits that could be sent up to trouble the living, some of them harmless and some of them cruel. There were the Adimu, the restless ghosts we met at the end of Enkidu's report, the ones who died badly, unburied or forgotten by their families, with no one to pour water for them, and who therefore could not rest, and came drifting back up into the houses of the living to make people sick, not out of malice exactly, but out of a kind of terrible need. In the mind of these people, a great deal of illness, a great deal of bad luck, a fever that would not break, a run of misfortune in a household, was the work of some hungry dead thing that had not been properly laid to rest. And much of their magic and their medicine was really an attempt to find out which one, and to feed it, or bind it, or send it back down where it belonged. When one of these restless dead came up and fastened itself on a household, the living did not simply endure it. They had specialists for exactly this, a kind of priest and physician in one, whose work was to find out which ghost had come, and what it lacked, and to give it that thing so it would go back down and stay down. And the way they went about it was practical and strange at once. They would make offerings to the ghost, the food and the water it had been denied. They would speak the words that bound it and turned it back toward the dark, and often they would make a small figure to stand for the dead one, a little image of clay or wax, and they would give that figure provisions for the road, and in some rituals even a gift to carry down to the gods below, a small bribe to smooth its arrival, and then they would bury the figure with full and proper rites, performing at last the funeral the ghost had never been given, so that it would go down content and take its place and trouble the living no more. Underneath the magic, it was an act of repair. A ghost came up because the thread had broken, because someone had died unfed or unburied or unnamed, and the cure was to mend the thread, to give the forgotten dead what they were owed and send them home. It rests, all of it, on the same conviction we keep meeting at every turn tonight, that the dead are still there, that they still need, that they are still reachable. and that the boundary between the floor of the living and the floor of the dead is thin enough, always, to be crossed in both directions by anyone who knows the words. And there were older, stranger horrors that stood at the boundaries. There was Lamashtu, a she-demon with the head of a lion and the teeth of a donkey, the daughter of the sky god himself, who slipped into the houses of women in childbirth to take the baby, who brought fever and miscarriage and the death of infants, the terror of every pregnant woman in that whole world. And against her, strangely, they set another monster. Because to fight a demon you sometimes need a demon, and the one they chose was Pazuzu. Pazuzu was hideous, a snarling dog's face, bulging eyes, the wings of a bird, the talons of an eagle, the tail of a scorpion, a body covered in scales, and he was the king of the wind demons, the bringer of the dry, killing wind out of the desert. But he had one virtue that mattered more than his ugliness. He hated Lamashtu, and so the people wore his image, hung his snarling head over their doors and around the necks of pregnant women, not to worship him but to set him as a guard, a monster on the threshold to keep a worse monster out. A little bronze Pazuzu head, worn on a cord, was one of the most common protective objects in that entire world, and you can see them now behind glass in museums, still snarling, still on guard against a danger that ended 4,000 years ago. And the underworld did not only wait for people to come down to it, it reached up. That is the thing to understand about the powers of the deep, that they were not sealed away behind their gates, but sent their servants climbing up the stair into the cities of the living whenever a life was due. Namtar, the queen's vizier, fate itself, was also the master of disease, and he commanded 60 of them, 60 sicknesses that he could loose on a body one at a time. And when he came up out of the dark, he came as the fever in the night, and the wasting that no healer could turn. And the god who would one day rule below, beside Ereshkigal Nergal, before he was ever a king of the dead, was the god of plague, and of the burning, killing heat of high summer, the one who emptied cities. In one great poem he is roused to fury, and looses the Sebetu, 7 warrior demons who are born of heaven and earth, and who know no mercy. And he sends them sweeping through the land, striking down the people in their thousands, the innocent with the guilty, until the world is nearly unmade, and the other gods must talk him down. So the dead were not the only traffic on that stair. Death itself walked up it, in the shape of fate and fever and plague and the 7 who kill, and came into the streets of the living and did its work, and went back down. We have one eyewitness to all of this, or something as close to one as the tablets give us. And it is worth ending the tour of the monsters with him, because he saw them, or believed he did, and came back shaking. He was a prince, an Assyrian prince, and like so many people in this story, he was tormented by the fear of death, and one night, in a dream or a vision, he was taken down into the underworld to see it for himself. And the text of what he saw is a gallery of horrors described one by one, each with the body of a man and the head of a beast, standing in the dark of that place with their duties. There was one with the head of a lion, and the hands and feet of a bird. There was one with the head of a bird, and one with 2 heads, and one with the head of an ox, and one with the head of a serpent, and one that was a man before and a lion behind, each of them a named power of the dead, each with talons or wings or a weapon, standing in that hall as the prince was led through it, so that you feel him being walked past them one at a time, his heart failing, unable to look away. And at the heart of it he was brought before Nergal himself, the king of the dead, seated on his throne in fury. And the god took hold of the prince by the hair, and dragged him close, and would have killed him on the spot, would have kept him there forever, except that one of the counselors of the underworld spoke up and stayed the god's hand, and persuaded him to let the young man go back up to the world of the living. And Nergal let him go, but not gently, and not without a message. Go back up, he was told, and do not forget what you have seen, carry it with you. And the prince woke, and he was never the same, and the whole point of the text is that warning, that a living person was shown the dark below and sent back up trembling to tell the rest of us that it is real and that it is waiting and that we would do well to live as people who know it is there. He is, in a way, the ancient ancestor of every story, since of someone who dies for a moment and comes back changed with news from the other side. And whether he truly went anywhere or only dreamed it in a fever, the fear in him was real, and it is the same fear that has run under this entire night, the oldest fear there is, the one that built the gates and staffed the pit at Ur and dressed the substitute in the robes, the fear of the dark below, and of going down into it, and of not being remembered once you have, but of all the guardians in all the corridors of the deep, the greatest. The ones who stood at the single most important doorway were the Scorpion people, and to meet them we have to leave the underworld of the dead for a moment and go to the edge of the world, to a mountain, because the tablets kept one more kind of downward passage, and it was not a grave, it was a tunnel that went in one side of a mountain and came out the other, under the earth, in total darkness, and it belonged to the sun. The mountain was called Mashu, which means the twins, and it was said to stand at the edge of the world where the sun goes down, and where the sun comes up, its twin peaks so high they touched the roof of heaven, and its roots so deep they reached all the way down to the underworld. Every evening the sun entered that mountain in the west, and traveled through it in the dark, and came out again in the east in the morning. There was a gate in the side of the mountain, and the gate had keepers, and the keepers were the Scorpion people. They were a man and a woman, and they were half human and half something else, their upper bodies like people and their lower bodies the segmented tail and sting of a scorpion. And the tablet says that the terror of them was overwhelming, that their glance was death, that their aura flickered over the mountainside and a mortal could not stand to look at them. They had guarded that gate since before there were people to be guarded from. And into their canyon one day came a living man. It was Gilgamesh again, the same king, but this is later in his life, after Enkidu has died, when grief has driven him out of his city and out onto the roads of the world looking for a way to escape death himself. He had heard of one man, far away, who had survived the great flood and been given eternal life, and he had decided to go and find him and ask him the secret, and the road to that man ran through the mountain of the sun. So Gilgamesh came to the gate of Mashu, and the Scorpion people saw him coming, and they saw at once that he was not entirely mortal, that there was God in him, and they let him approach, and they asked him why he had come so far to a place no human being had ever reached. And when he told them, they warned him. No one has ever gone through, they said. The path through the mountain is the path the sun takes, and it is 12 leagues of darkness, utter darkness, no light before and no light behind, and no human has ever walked it and lived. Go back. He would not go back. And so they opened the gate of the mountain, and Gilgamesh went in, and the tablet does something remarkable here. Something almost no ancient story does. It slows down, and it makes you walk it with him, league by league in the dark. He went 1 league into the mountain. The darkness was thick, and there was no light, and he could see nothing ahead of him and nothing behind. He went 2 leagues into the mountain. The darkness was thick, and there was no light, and he could see nothing ahead and nothing behind. 3 leagues. The darkness was thick, and there was no light. 4 leagues. The darkness was thick and there was no light. And on, the same words, the same black, repeated so that you begin to feel the weight of it, the way you feel it in a tunnel that goes on too long, that pressure of the mountain over your head and the fear that you have made a terrible mistake and there is no way now but forward. 5 leagues. 6, 7, 8 leagues in, the tablet says. He cried out, because a person can only take so much of that dark and that silence before something in them breaks and makes a sound just to prove they are still there. And then, at the 9th league, he felt the north wind on his face. Something was moving in the darkness. Air. A breath of the outside, coming toward him, which meant there was an outside, which meant the tunnel had another end. At the 10th league, the way out was near. At the 11th, the first gray light appeared ahead of him, the faintest lifting of the black. And at 12 leagues he came out of the mountain into the light, ahead of the sun, into a garden he could never have imagined. A garden of the gods where the trees did not bear leaves and fruit but jewels, where carnelian hung on the branches heavy and red and ripe, and lapis lazuli grew in blue clusters, and the whole grove of it flashed and glittered by the shore of a bright sea. He had walked under the world in the dark, the road of the dead, and the road of the sun, and he had come out the other side alive, the only mortal ever to do it, into a place made entirely of light and stone. Hold that image, because we are going to need it at the end of the night. A tunnel through a mountain, 12 stretches of total darkness, a guarded gate, a warning, a passage no living person is meant to take, and a hidden world on the far side of it. Because thousands of years after the last person who could read that tablet had died and been forgotten, other people in another age would hear that there were ancient texts describing tunnels into the earth and gates with guardians and hidden worlds in the dark below, and they would not read them the way the Sumerians meant them. They would read them as a map. But we are not there yet. We have one more god to meet at the bottom of the world, and it is the strangest love story these people ever told, because it happens in the land of the dead. We have spent this whole night calling Ereshkigal the queen of the underworld, and she is, but for a long age she ruled it entirely alone. There was no king beside her. She sat on that throne in the dark by herself, the loneliest figure in all of the tablets, and the story of how that changed is one of the few times these people let themselves imagine that even the bottom of the world might not be beyond the reach of company. It begins, as so much does, with a feast up in the light to which she could not come. The gods of the sky were holding a banquet, and they wanted Ereshkigal to have her share, but the queen of the dead cannot climb up out of the underworld to sit at a table in heaven, any more than the gods of the sky can casually go down into the land of no return. So they sent a message down inviting her to send a representative to come up and collect her portion, and she sent her vizier, Namtar. Fate himself, up the long stair into the hall of the gods, and when Namtar entered that bright assembly, all the gods rose to their feet out of respect for the messenger of the underworld, all of them except one. There was a god named Nergal, a fierce and violent god, the god of war and plague and the burning heat of high summer. And Nergal, for whatever reason, pride or carelessness or contempt, stayed seated when the messenger of the dead came in, and did not rise. Namtar saw it and said nothing and went back down and told his queen, and Ereshkigal was insulted to the very center of her lonely dignity. This god who would not stand for my messenger, she said, send him down to me. Send him here, into my house, and I will kill him. It was, on its face, a death sentence, and everyone understood it that way. Nergal was terrified, and he went to his father Ea, the clever one, the same Enki we have followed all night, and Ea helped him the way he helps everyone, with preparation and with tricks. He gave Nergal an escort of 14 demons to take down with him for protection, and he gave him a set of rules to survive the underworld, rules that are the mirror image of the ones Gilgamesh gave Enkidu, because they are about resisting the place rather than hiding from it. When you go down there, Ea told him, they will bring you a chair. Do not sit in it. They will bring you bread. Do not eat it. They will bring you meat. Do not eat it. They will bring you beer. Do not drink it. They will bring you water for your feet. Do not wash, because to accept the hospitality of the underworld, to eat its food and sit in its seat, is to become part of it, to belong to it, and never to be able to leave. And, he had added, and this is the part that matters, when Ereshkigal goes to bathe, and you see her body, do not do what your heart will want you to do. Nergal went down, past the 7 gates, into the house of the queen of the dead, and he did well at first. They brought him the chair, and he did not sit. They brought him the bread and the meat and the beer, and he refused it all. He kept every rule Ea had given him, and by keeping them he stayed free, still a visitor, still able to leave. But then Ereshkigal rose to bathe, and she uncovered her body, and Nergal, the god who had refused every seat and every cup, looked at the loneliest queen in creation, and his resolve broke, and the tablet says simply that they gave in to their desire for one another, and they went to the bed, and they stayed there, one day, and a second day, and a third, a passion at the bottom of the world between the queen of death and the god of war. And then, on the seventh day, Nergal got up, and he made an excuse, and he fled. He slipped back up through the 7 gates and out into the light and back to the assembly of the gods, and he thought he had gotten away. But Ereshkigal, when she woke and found him gone, did not fly into the rage you would expect. She broke. This is the astonishing turn in the story. The queen of the dead, who had ordered his death, who could have cursed him and destroyed him, instead fell apart with grief at being left, exactly the way anyone left behind falls apart. She called Namtar, and she wept in front of him, and what she said is one of the most human things any god says on any tablet. "I was a young girl," she said. "I never knew the play of other girls. I never knew the love of a husband or the joy of a child. And now the one who came to me, the one I lay with, has gone, and I am alone again in the dark. Bring him back to me." And she sent Namtar up to the gods with a threat that only she could make, and it is a magnificent one. "Give me back that god," she said, "or I will raise up the dead. And I will send them up into the world of the living, and the dead will outnumber the living, and they will devour them." It is the ultimate threat, the one power the queen of the underworld holds over everyone above, and she used it not to conquer anything, but to get back the one person who had ever shared her bed and her loneliness. And the gods, faced with that, gave Nergal up. They sent him back down. And this time he did not flee. This time he stayed, and he became her husband, and the king of the underworld beside her. And from then on the land of the dead was ruled by the two of them together, the queen who had always been there, and the war god who had come down under a death sentence and been kept by love. Even here, the tablets are saying, even at the very bottom, in the house of dust, in the land of no return, someone found someone. It does not make the underworld less dark, but it makes it less alone. And to these people, as we have seen all night, being alone in the dark was the thing they feared most of all. There is one last descent, and it belongs to the man who fought hardest not to make it. Gilgamesh, the king who crossed the world and walked the tunnel of the sun and dived for the plant of youth, all to escape dying, died anyway, as the tablets always knew he would. The gods gathered and fixed his fate, and for all his greatness and all his refusal, his body failed, and his breath stopped, and he went down the same stair as everyone else. But the poem the Sumerians wrote about his death does not leave him weeping in the dust like Ur-Nammu. Because Gilgamesh was too great to be only a shade, they gave him a post. Down in the land of the dead, they made him an officer of the place, a governor and a judge, and they set him among the powers of the underworld to render judgment over the newly arrived, to keep the accounts of the dead, to sit in that dim court and decide the small orderings of the country below. The man who could not bear the thought of death was made, in death, a magistrate of it. He who ran to the ends of the earth to escape the underworld ended by administering it, and perhaps, the poets seem to suggest, that was its own kind of mercy, to give the restless king something to do with eternity, a duty. A seat that was not merely dust, so that even Gilgamesh, in the end, was not left with nothing to hold. There was even a place on the ordinary map, a real city you could walk to, that served as the underworld's address among the living. It was called Kutha, and it was the city of Nergal, and his great temple stood there, and it was a normal enough city in most ways, with its streets and its fields and its living people going about their days. But because it belonged so completely to the god of the dead, Its name came loose from its geography and became a word for the underworld itself. To say Kutha was almost to say the grave. The boundary between the city of the living and the city of the dead, it turns out, could run right down the middle of a single town, so that a person could be born and grow old and die in a place whose very name was one of the names of the country they were going down to. That is how close these people felt the two worlds to be. Not a universe apart. Not even a journey apart, always, sometimes only a floor apart, or a gate, or the thickness of the ground under a house, or the distance between a city and its own name. And that is the world the tablets built beneath our feet, a cosmos of stacked floors, a sea of sweet water and the god of wisdom asleep inside it, a long stair, and 7 bolted gates, and a house of dust where the dead sit in the dark and are fed by the memory of the living. A lonely queen and the war god who joined her, judges with the eye of death, demons who cannot be bribed, a mountain with a tunnel of pure darkness running through its roots, and everywhere the sense that down is not empty, that down is a real place with a geography and a population and rules. They believed all of it, completely, for thousands of years. And the remarkable thing, the thing we turn to now, is that when the diggers came in the last 2 centuries and put their spades into those old mounds, some of what they found in the ground was not myth at all. Some of it was real, and it was waiting exactly where the stories said the doorway to the dead had always been. You can see how ordinary people prepared for that journey, because we have dug up thousands of their graves, and they buried their dead with a tenderness and a practicality that match everything the tablets say. They did not usually burn their dead, for reasons you already understand, since to be burned was to go up as smoke and not down as a shade, and to be denied the underworld altogether. They laid them in the ground. Often they laid them on one side, with the knees drawn up toward the chest, in the position of someone sleeping, or of a child before it is born, curled and at rest, and they did not send them down empty-handed. They put things in the grave, provisions for the road and the dark country at the end of it. A cup set near the hand so the dead one would have something to drink, a bowl with a little food in it, beads, a ring, a pin, the small ornaments of a life, sometimes a weapon for a man, a spindle for a woman, the tools of who they had been, sometimes a little model of a boat for the crossing of that dark river, and very often they buried them close, under the floor of the house itself, beneath the rooms where the family went on living, so that the dead stayed near and could be reached and fed and remembered. Everything the poems describe, the journey, the river, the dark country, the need to arrive provided for and to be sustained by the living, is there in the dirt, in the curled sleeping bodies and the cups set by their hands, laid down by people who believed, completely, that they were packing someone for a long trip to a real place. The place to begin is a city called one of the great old cities of the south, the city the moon god ruled, and in the 1920s a British archaeologist named Leonard Woolley spent 12 years digging into it. He found the great stepped tower, the ziggurat, still standing after 4,000 years. He found streets and houses and temples, and then, in one corner of the site, he began to find graves, and he kept digging, and by the time he was done he had uncovered nearly 2,000 of them, a vast cemetery of the ordinary dead of buried with their cups and their beads and their small belongings, laid down over centuries. But among those 2,000 ordinary graves, Woolley found 16 that were not ordinary at all. And when he understood what he was looking at, he could hardly believe it, and for a while he did not tell anyone, because he was not sure he would be believed. These 16 graves were tombs, real-built tombs, stone chambers down at the bottom of deep pits, and in the chambers lay a single important body, a king or a queen or a great priest, surrounded by a wealth of gold and silver and lapis that stopped the breath, golden helmets, golden cups, a golden headdress of leaves and rings, a lyre with the head of a bull worked in gold and blue stone, But it was not the treasure that made Wooly go quiet. It was the other bodies, because these great ones had not gone down into the earth alone. Around them, in the pit, filling the ramp that led down into the tomb, lay other people, many of them, soldiers with their spears and their copper helmets laid in rows near the entrance as if on guard, grooms beside the oxen that had pulled the wagons down into the grave, and women, many women, dressed in their finest, in headdresses of gold and silver and lapis and carnelian, laid out in careful rows across the floor of the pit, with musicians among them, their instruments beside them, one woman's hand still resting where the strings of her harp had been. In the largest of them, the one Wooly called the Great Death Pit, there were 74 of these attendant bodies laid down together around their dead master. 6 men, 68 women, all of them arranged, composed, deliberately placed, and all of them dead at the same time as the one they surrounded. Wooly's conclusion was the one the arrangement forces on you. These people had gone down into the grave on purpose, to accompany the Great One into the next world, to be the retinue of a king or a queen in the land of the dead. He imagined it as a solemn procession, the attendants walking down the ramp into the open pit in their finery, to the sound of the harps, and taking, he thought, some kind of drug, a cup of something, lying down in their rows and going to sleep and being covered over. A quiet, willing death, a royal household following its lord down the stairs of the world exactly as the myths described, so that the king would not arrive in the house of dust alone and unattended, but would come in as a king with his court around him. That was the gentle version, and it stood for most of a century. But the science kept going, and not long ago researchers took 2 of the skulls from that great death pit and put them through a modern scanner and looked closely at the bone, and what they found was not so gentle. Both skulls had been struck, before death or right at the moment of it, by a blunt instrument, hard, a hole driven into the head. These attendants had not simply drifted off on a sleeping draught. They had been killed, dispatched with a blow, and there was evidence that afterward their bodies had been treated, heated and preserved so that they would keep, so that they could be arranged just so, and laid out in their beautiful rows in the pit around their master. Sit with that for a moment, because it is the point where the myth and the dirt touch. Everything we have said tonight about how these people saw death, the belief that the great below was a real place, that you went there to stay, that a person of high rank should arrive there properly attended, with a household and music and wealth, that the arrangement of the dead mattered, all of it was not just poetry. At someone believed it enough to send 74 living people down into a pit to serve a dead one, and to strike them down and lay them in rows so that the tableau would be perfect. The land of no return was real enough to them that they staffed it. When you stand in the museum today and look at the golden headdress of the queen of that grave, you are looking at something that was worn down a ramp into the dark on purpose, by a woman who never came back up, because the story we have been telling all night was, to her and to everyone who buried her, simply the truth about where she was going. And the pit at was not the only place where the belief broke through into terrible practice. Remember the deepest rule of the underworld, the one that trapped Inanna even after she was revived, the one that ran through the tale of Enlil going down. No one rises without leaving someone in their place. The underworld must have its life. And there was a moment, much later in the age of the great Assyrian and Babylonian kings, when the living took that rule and acted it out with open eyes, when the omens turned dark against the king, when an eclipse or a sign in the sky was read by the diviners to mean that the king himself was going to die. They did not simply wait for it. They cheated the underworld with a substitute. They took another man, sometimes a prisoner, sometimes a simpleton, sometimes just an unlucky commoner, and they dressed him in the royal robes, and they set him on the throne, and they called him king. And for a set time, 100 days or so, he sat there and was treated as the king and given a queen and honored, while the true king stepped down and lived quietly to one side under a plain name, calling himself the farmer. The idea was that the doom in the sky, the death that was coming for the king, would fall on the man who was wearing the kingship, the man on the throne, and would be spent on him. And when the 100 days were up, and the danger judged to have passed, the substitute was put to death, and then buried with the full honors of a king, mourned as a king, sent down into the earth as a king, so that the underworld would receive the royal life it had been promised and be satisfied, and leave the real king back on his throne, alone. It is one of the coldest things in the record, and one of the clearest. They believed the rule literally. Someone had to go down in your place, and if you were powerful enough, you could choose who. And if shows you how seriously they took the destination, another mound, further south, shows you how old and how deep the whole thing goes, all the way down to the very first temple ever built. That mound is Eridu, the first city, the one we started with, the one that sat over the sweet water, over Enki's house in the deep. When the diggers went into Eridu, they did what you do with these mounds. They cut down through the layers, and each layer was a temple built on the ruins of the temple before it. And they kept going down. Below the great temple, an older temple. Below that, an older one still. Level after level, each one built on the exact same spot as the last. Generation after generation refusing to move the holy place even a few feet to one side, always rebuilding over the same ground. They counted 18 of these temples, one below another, going down through thousands of years, and at the very bottom, on the lowest floor of all, beneath everything, they found the first one. And the first one was almost nothing. A single small room of mud brick, only a few feet across, a little chapel you could nearly reach across with your arms. But even that first tiny room, built by people near the very beginning of cities, had two things in it. It had a low platform, a place to set an offering, and it had a niche in the wall, a place for the god to be. 7,000 years ago, before the pyramids, before writing itself was finished, someone raised a little mud room over the sweet water at the edge of the marsh and left a place in it to give something to whatever was underneath, and every generation after them rebuilt it, higher and grander, 18 times over, up to the great ziggurat whose ruins still stand there in the dust, and all of it, was piled on top of that first small offering table above the deep. They never forgot what was down there. For 7,000 years they kept building doorways to it on the same spot, so the tablets were not simply telling stories. Underneath them was a real and very old conviction, old as the first cities, that beneath the ground there was water. And beneath the water there was a world, and that the boundary between the living and that world was a real place you could stand on and build over and leave offerings at and, at walk down into. And it is exactly that conviction, that ancient and almost universal feeling that the earth is not solid all the way down, but hollow somewhere, and inhabited, and enterable, that would come loose from the tablets thousands of years later, and grow into something the Sumerians would not have recognized at all. For most of human history, the idea that the earth was hollow was simply the way people felt about the ground. It was not a theory. It was the underworld, the land of the dead, the caverns of the gods, present in almost every culture on earth in one form or another. But then something happened that turned that old feeling into something that dressed itself up as science, and it is worth telling, because it is where the modern version of tonight's story truly begins, and because the man who started it was not a crank. He was one of the great scientists of his age. His name was Edmund Halley, and you know his name, because there is a comet named after him, the comet whose return he was the first to predict. In the year 1692, Halley stood up before the Royal Society in London, the most respected scientific body in the world, and proposed in complete seriousness that the earth was hollow. He had noticed that the compass does not behave simply, that the magnetic pole seems to drift over the years, and he could not explain it with a single solid magnetic earth. So he proposed that the earth was made of shells, a series of hollow globes nested one inside another like the layers of an onion, an outer shell that we live on about 500 miles thick, and inside it another sphere, and inside that another, each one turning at its own slightly different rate, each with its own magnetism, which was why the compass wandered. And in the spaces between these shells, Halley suggested, there might be air, lit by some kind of glowing atmosphere, and, he allowed himself to wonder aloud, those inner regions might even be inhabited, a luminous air inside the earth, and perhaps someone living in it. From one of the founders of modern astronomy, in front of the Royal Society in 1692. The idea did not die with Halley, it grew. More than a century later, in America, a former Army officer named John Clive Sims took it further than Halley ever had. In 1818, he printed a circular and sent it out across the country, and it began with a sentence that people laughed at for the rest of his life. I declare, he wrote, that the earth is hollow and habitable within. He believed there were vast openings at the north and the south poles, holes thousands of miles wide where the outer shell curved inward and you could sail or walk right over the lip and down into the world inside. People called them Sims holes, and they called him mad, but he was serious to the end of his life. He lectured. He petitioned Congress. He asked, formally, for an expedition to be funded to sail to the North Pole and find the opening and go through it into the inner world. Congress did not fund it. But the idea that there were doorways at the poles, gates at the top and bottom of the world, leading down into a hidden inhabited earth, was now loose in the modern imagination, and it would not leave. It fused, over time, with older and stranger things, with legends borrowed from the other side of the world of a hidden kingdom beneath the mountains, a secret realm of the wise called by names like Agartha and Shambhala, a civilization living inside the earth, advanced and ancient and watching. And in the 20th century it attached itself to a real man, an American admiral and polar explorer named Richard Byard, who flew over both poles and was a genuine hero of exploration. Long after his flights, stories began to circulate, a supposed secret diary in which Byard claimed to have flown not over the pole but into an opening there, and down into a warm green land inside the earth, and to have met the beings who lived there. There is no real evidence he ever wrote or said any such thing. The diary appeared after his death, and every serious historian regards it as an invention. But it did not matter, because by then the story had its own momentum, and a real explorer's name gave it exactly the weight of authority it needed. The hollow earth, the polar openings, the hidden civilization in the warm inner world, the advanced watchers beneath our feet, all of it was now a permanent fixture of the modern imagination, and all it needed was an ancient pedigree, a claim that the oldest people on earth had known about it too. And that is where the tablets were pulled back in, because there was a writer in the last century, a man named Zecharia Sitchin, who took the Sumerian texts, the very ones we have spent this night inside, and read them in a way no scholar of the language accepts, and turned them into the missing ancient chapter of the whole story. Sitchin said the gods of Sumer were not gods at all, but visitors from another planet, and that the Abzu, the sweet water deep beneath the earth that was the domain of Enki, was not a freshwater ocean and not a poetic underworld, but a literal network of minds, deep workings cut into the body of the earth where these visitors put human beings to labor. He read the god of wisdom's title, Lord of the Deep, as Lord of Mining. He read the descents and the tunnels and the 7 gates and the hidden worlds below as garbled memories of real installations under the ground. In his telling, the world beneath the earth that the tablets describe is real and physical and engineered, and everything the Sumerians wrote about it is a distorted eyewitness report. You have spent this whole night in the actual texts, so you are in a position to hear that fairly and to see what it is. The scholars who have given their lives to reading this language do not find any of it in the clay. The word Sitchin read as mining means wisdom, The Abzu is fresh water and the source of springs, not a mine shaft. Enki is the god of that water and of magic and of cleverness, and the descents into the underworld are about death and grief and the seasons and the terrible fairness of a place where the crown comes off at the gate. There are no spacecraft in these tablets. There are no engineered tunnels full of slaves. There is a mountain the sun passes through in the dark, and there is a stair down to a house of dust, and there is a lonely queen, and there are 7 gates, and none of it is a survey report. It is one of the oldest and most honest things human beings ever wrote about what it feels like to know that you are going to die, and that everyone you love is going to die, and to try, in the dark, to imagine where they go. And the modern hollow earth, the polar doorways, the warm green inner world, the advanced civilization beneath the ice, is a different kind of thing entirely. It is a wish. It is the very old and very human wish that the ground is not simply solid and indifferent all the way down, that down there, somewhere reachable, there is a world, and a light, and someone home. We know now, from the way earthquakes ring through the planet like a struck bell, that the earth is solid rock and molten metal the whole way to the center, that there is no inner sun and no hollow and no opening at either pole, that if you could dig straight down you would find only heat and pressure and stone. The inner world is not a place on any map, but listen to what the wish is, underneath, because it is not really different from the thing the Sumerians were reaching for. When Halley imagined a glowing air inside the earth with someone living in it, when Sims dreamed of an opening at the pole and a whole world through the gate, when people whispered that an explorer had flown into the earth and found it warm and green and inhabited, they were feeling the same thing the people of felt when they walked a queen down a ramp into a pit with her whole court around her. They were refusing to believe that down is empty. They could not stand the idea that beneath us and ahead of us there is only the dark and the cold and the nothing. So they filled it. The Sumerians filled it with a house of dust and a queen and 7 gates. The moderns filled it with an inner sun and a green land and a hidden people. Different furniture. The same refusal, the same reaching down into the dark and insisting that something must be there. And maybe that is the truest thing the tablets have to give us tonight, truer than any of the gods and any of the gates. Not a map of a real place under the ground. A record of how long, and how deeply and how tenderly, human beings have needed the earth beneath them not to be empty. 5,000 years ago they pressed it into clay. We are still pressing it, in our own way, into our own stories, right now. So let the gods go back down. Let Enki settle into his sweet water beneath the first city. Let Ereshkigal have her war god beside her in the dark, so that the loneliest throne in creation is not lonely after all. Let the 7 gates stand bolted, and the dust lie thick on the bolts, and the little stillborn ones play at their golden table, and the sun begin its long night walk through the tunnel of the mountain, carrying its one light down through the middle of the world, so that even the house of dust is not, for 1 hour, entirely dark. You do not have to go down there tonight. You are here, in the warm, above the ground, with the weight of your own body sinking softly into the bed, and the dark of the room around you is a gentle dark, not the dark of the deep. The doorway at Eridu has dust on its offering table now. The pit at Ur is quiet and behind glass. The mountain of the sun is only a story. All of it is far below you and long ago, and none of it is coming for you tonight. Let it all sink down, slowly, the way everything sinks in the end, and let yourself sink with it, not into the house of dust, but only into sleep, which is the gentlest going down there is, and the only one you always climb back up from, in the morning, into the light. Rest now, the world beneath the earth will keep. It has kept for 5,000 years, and it will still be there, quiet and complete, long after you have closed your eyes. Sleep well.